All right, you've been asking for it for years, since probably the first wheel build that ever took place on this channel. So for this Tinker Tuesday, we are going to do how to build a wheel in the most basic of conditions, using nothing but the bike that we have and the spoke wrench that I hope you own. Okay, so first and foremost, obviously you need to figure out what it is you're going to use for materials for your build. Here I just have an old Bontrager rim that was wildly damaged, that is actually damaged beyond repair, but still good enough for this tutorial. The spokes that came with it, and actually the hub that came with it too. So I know for a fact that the spoke length is correct. And I've currently got the pile of brake side spokes, which are shorter than the non-brake side, separated and moved from each other, and also labeled on the wall, if you're wondering what that was about. Now, what I suggest you do if you haven't purchased the stuff that you want already, go check out this link that I've hopefully linked below and look at the database of hubs and rims that they have there and choose something from there that you're interested in. There is a huge database of hubs and rims on this website with the measurements already taken, and the calculation is done for you to tell you what spoke length you need. Okay, now that you got everything laid out in front of you, organized, and you're happy to get started, people love to start talking about spoke prep. And in my case, for a lot of my builds, my spoke prep is purely and utterly the simplest that it can be. Just construction grade grease. And I tend to not mess around. Dip them in there, call it a day. The reason you do this is to lube the threads so that you can actually get the proper tension. If you just don't tell anybody what you used, no one is the wiser. Okay, now comes the first task that is easily the most daunting to all novice and beginner wheel builders. And that is the simple act of lacing that hub to the rim. So first things first, let's actually look at this rim for a second and put our first spoke in. Now, as you can see, here's our valve hole, here is our first spoke hole, and here is our second. I'm hoping that you can see there would be a line that goes through the center here, and each spoke hole is offset in one direction from where that center line would be. You're going to take your rim, you're going to lay it on your lap. Now you have your hub. I'm going to call this drive side or brake side up and place it in the middle. Now take the corresponding length spoke and place it through one of the holes. Place it in the first spoke hole to the right of the valve hole that is on the correct side, this side of the center line of the rim. I like to put it on about 3 turns. First spoke hole to the right of the valve hole that is on the correct side of the center line of the rim for this side of the flange. Got it? You can pretty much repeat the same thing. Have it on your lap, leave one empty hole next to the spoke that you just put in, place it in here, and count 1, 2, 3, 4 holes on the rim. Again, that's 1, 2, 3, 4. Now repeat that for this entire side of the wheel. Skip 1 hole on the hub, count 4 on the rim. Okay, that's the brake side trailing spokes installed. You're in good shape so far, keep going. Continuing to look at this valve hole area, this is the next critical step. So here is our first spoke. You didn't know this, but this is actually called the key spoke. We want to keep working with it just a little bit to drop the next spoke in for the non-drive side. Hubs are actually drilled so that the spoke holes don't match up, but when you drop this spoke in, it'll land beside that spoke right there. See what I mean? This is the spoke hole that you want to put this in to get this spoke up to this hole. Drop your first non-drive side spoke down and make sure that it's on the inside of the key spoke and not this side. Put it in, get the nipple on. These 2 spokes don't cross each other here. They shouldn't cross each other. They should run somewhat parallel with each other. And then follow those same steps as described the last time all the way around the rest of the wheel. Okay, now is the twist, which I usually just keep it twisted the entire time, but you want to make sure that the wheel is twisted to the right and that at the valve hole, the spokes are twisted away from the valve hole. That's going to make sure that you have the opening that you want so that you have easy valve access, and also to make sure that you've got no awkward spoke crossings where there shouldn't be. You should be looking like this at this point. In my opinion, you're kind of smooth sailing at this point. So now we're doing our 3-cross. This is 1, 2, 3 spokes. That's 1, 2, and then laced behind the last spoke, 3 to the hole on the appropriate side of the center line. This right here is where it's going to become obvious whether or not you screwed up your lacing pattern if you don't have this gap at the valve hole. If you find you don't have this nice square gap in your valve hole area, it's fine. It's not going to mess with the structure of the wheel. It's just kind of the only real thing that I wanted to be hard on you about. You can keep going at this point, or you can take it apart and try again. At this point, you're home free. Start lacing the rest of it the exact same way, counting 3 spokes, lacing behind the last 3rd cross spoke, putting it in the appropriate side hole for the center line of the rim for the flange that you're working on. Now, because I assume we're all novices and beginners here, I'm going to say we probably don't have access to truing stands in our sheds, garages, basements. So in comes the impromptu truing stand fork. So right now you've got a wildly untensioned yet laced wheel. And the next step is easy, but it is a test of patience. Find the valve hole, get your handy dandy flathead screwdriver, and start equally turning the nipples on the threads of each spoke all the way around the wheel. Truly, the main goal is to have an equal amount of tension on every spoke all the way around the wheel. My real go-to for finding out if you've got every spoke at the exact same spot is just to bring each nipple down to the absolute end of the threads of the spoke so that it just covers that last thread. That way you know they're all at exactly the same spot. So I'm going to do that now and just kind of see what happens. But you want to do it gradually. That's the whole point. All of this is gradual movements, checking it as you go. The more patient you are at this point, the easier the final truing, roundness, and tensioning will be. I mostly am just curious to see if I can make this rim round again. Now as the threads start to disappear into each nipple, typically at this point, the wheel will firm up, which of course it has. It's firmed up enough that we can actually start to true in a meaningful fashion. Though at this point first, to make sure that everything is bedded in, I like to grab each of your group of 4 spokes. See these ones that kind of cross each other like this? This is the group. But just kind of push them together like this. That'll correct the spoke angle out of the hub, and it'll give it the correct spoke angle into the rim. Now I will say, for a wheel that was completely tacoed, this is pretty good. It's always way easier to get a good true and a good radial trueness when the tension is at this sort of level than when it's at its operating high tension level. So take your time now to actually put the effort in. And when you don't have a truing stand and you're doing it in a fork upside down like this, zip ties and brake pads are your friend. Cut off a little tail. This is now your truing stand gauge. Depending on what you're at for tension, you may or may not need to be using your spoke wrench at this point. I'm going to use my spoke wrench for simplicity. Now, truing and tensioning this wheel truly is a little bit of a lost cause. The rim itself was so far gone and damaged and bent that there's just no reliable way to actually get the proper equal spoke tension all the way around and create a wheel that's actually going to be safe and well enough to ride. But when it comes to the monotonous, annoying, very patient-inducing process of tensioning, truing, and basically finishing a wheel, I very much recommend going to the Sheldon Brown website, which is where I learned to build my first set of wheels, and it's been the basis of every wheel build I've done since. The minute that you finish your first wheel build, either the bug will bite and you'll want to do more, and you're going to need to read this book, or you're never going to want to do it again. Keep this in mind. Now, one thing I would like to say is that when you're at home and you're taking on your first wheel build, it's hard to know what is the right tension. And I do kind of like the way Sheldon Brown puts it on his website. If it feels like it's getting a little bit too tough to be turning the nipples on the spokes, then you're probably reaching the maximum tension and you can stop right there. Unfortunately, as beginners, we don't have a dishing tool, so it's something that you just kind of have to do by eye in either the fork or the rear triangle of the bike that you're building it for. Okay, if you felt this was helpful, let me know. There's nothing I hate making more than tutorials, so yeah.
And I thought you were ready to give up.